All right, so you know how this works. You send us something interesting, something thought-provoking.
Something that makes us go, huh, we need to really unpack this.
Exactly, and that's exactly what we've got today. You sent us some excerpts about something called schizoanalysis.
And let me tell you, this is a deep one.
It is. So we're going to take a deep dive into it, figure out what it is, how it challenges some of the more traditional ways of thinking about, well, the mind, and why it might actually give you a whole new perspective on pretty much everything.
Yeah, and I think when we first started looking at this material, it really struck us as this fascinating, almost revolutionary approach to understanding not only ourselves, but like you said, the hidden workings of society.
Yeah, the stuff beneath the surface.
Right, and our goal today is to really try to make sense of these core ideas, see what emerges, and maybe even come up with some surprising insights for you.
So schizoanalysis, I mean, it sounds intense. What even is it?
It sounds a little intimidating, right?
Yeah.
Well, the groundwork for schizoanalysis was laid by two really influential French thinkers,
Okay.
Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari.
Okay, those names are familiar.
Yeah, you might have come across them. They wrote some pretty groundbreaking stuff, particularly Anti-Oedipus in 1972 and later A Thousand Plateaus in 1980. Really heady stuff. Now, think of schizoanalysis as this radical offshoot of psychoanalysis.
Radical. Okay.
Yeah, they were really trying to break free from some of the more established, more traditional ways of thinking, particularly Freudian and Lacanian approaches.
Okay, so radical, like what were they trying to shake up? Like how we see things?
They felt that a lot of traditional thought, especially in psychology and social sciences, was really stuck in these rigid, almost hierarchical structures.
Okay, like boxes.
Exactly. Boxes, categories. They wanted to challenge all of that. And not just in how we understand our own minds, who we are, our subjectivity, as they call it,
Right.
but also in how society itself is organized, and even the fundamental ways that we think. And they felt like traditional psychoanalysis had become, I don't know, a bit too stuck on certain models.
Oh, interesting. So what models are we talking about here?
Well, the big one, the one they really took issue with, was the Oedipal framework.
Okay, the Oedipus complex, right.
Exactly. You know, that central idea in a lot of psychoanalytic theory that our core desires and hangups, they all stem from these early family dynamics, specifically, you know, the child's feelings for their mother and their rivalry with their father.
Right, right. Classic. So where does schizoanalysis kind of part ways with that? Like how do they deviate from that?
This is where it gets really interesting. So schizoanalysis offers this really fundamental critique of this whole Oedipal way of looking at things. They argued that boiling down all of human desire to these family dramas and neuroses, it misses a much broader picture.
Oh.
They saw desire as something far more expansive, something inherently creative, something even capable of causing real change in the world.
So revolutionary desire.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
They really believe that what we want, what drives us, isn't just about resolving some personal internal conflict rooted in our family lives. It's much more than that. Instead, they saw desire as being deeply woven into the fabric of social and political realities.
Okay.
Desire, in their view, is a force that actively shapes the world around us and is, in turn, shaped by it.
Okay, so it's not just about wanting a bigger allowance from your parents.
No, not just that.
It's something bigger.
It's something much bigger. So what are some of the core ideas that they use to explain this broader concept of desire?
Yeah. How do they actually, put this into practice?
Well, there are several really key ideas that are essential for grasping schizoanalysis. One of the first is this concept called desiring production.
Desiring production. Okay, let's break that down. It sounds like two things kind of mashed together.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. It really is two things kind of mashed together. The key is that they completely flip the script on what desire is. Instead of seeing it as a lack, this feeling that we want something because we're missing it, which is a big part of how thinkers like Freud and Lacan saw it.
Okay, yeah.
Deleuze and Guattari argued that desire is fundamentally productive.
Okay.
It's active. It's always creating connections.
Connections between what kinds of things?
All sorts of things. People, objects, machines, different systems, ideas. They use this really simple, everyday example. Think about someone eating a sandwich.
Okay.
On the surface, it's just a person in a sandwich. But through the lens of schizoanalysis, you start to see this whole chain of connections being activated. The mouth, the sandwich itself, the bakery or factory where it was made, the people who grew the ingredients, the transportation networks that brought it all together. All of these things are linked in this single act of wanting and eating a sandwich. It's not just about satisfying your hunger. It's about this whole web of relationships that are brought into being by that desire.
So the next time I grab a coffee, it's not just about needing that caffeine.
Right.
It's about connecting to this whole system. Growers, shippers, baristas, everything.
Exactly, exactly. And they actually call these connections, these links, machines.
Machines, okay.
And all together, they form this larger, this ongoing process of desiring production.
Okay.
And they famously said, desire is not a lack, but a machine.
Okay, that's really different. So what's another key idea that we should know about?
Another crucial concept is the body without organs,
Body without organs.
often just called the BWO. Now, this is important. Don't take this literally as a physical body that's missing organs.
Yeah.
It's much more of a metaphor.
Okay, a metaphor for what?
It's a metaphor for a body that has been freed from all these imposed structures,
Yeah.
whether those are social structures, the way society tells us we should be, psychological structures, our ingrained habits and beliefs, or even fixed ideas about our physical identities. The BWO was all about resisting being organized by any kind of hierarchy or predefined identity.
So pure potential, like before we get shaped by the world.
Precisely, precisely. Think of it as a way of imagining existence, not as this fixed organism with all these distinct parts and functions, but more as this field of raw energy, flows, intensities, and untapped possibilities. It's about what a body could do, not what it is, according to some established category.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get a clearer picture of that. What's the third one?
So the third key idea is their understanding of schizophrenia as a process.
Schizophrenia as a process.
And this is another area where they really break with traditional views. They don't primarily see schizophrenia as a mental illness in the way that it's, clinically defined.
So if it's not a clinical diagnosis, then what is it for them?
They're using it as a metaphor. For Deleuze and Guattari, schizophrenia represents this kind of fundamental resistance to structured identity and conformity. So the schizoanalysis isn't necessarily someone who's been diagnosed with schizophrenia, but rather someone who resists being neatly labeled, someone who deterritorializes established meanings.
Interterritorializing.
Yeah, basically pulls those meanings apart, right? And who makes these unexpected and unconventional connections between things.
Okay, so what would that look like, deterritorializing?
So think about someone who uses language or behaves in ways that seem to go against the grain, that don't quite fit into, conventional understanding. Schizoanalysis might see this not just as a breakdown of sense, but also as this kind of creative destruction of established codes and meanings. And they see a potential for completely new connections and new ways of understanding to emerge from this process. They viewed it as this potentially creative and even revolutionary act of freeing oneself from established norms.
Oh, okay.
Like when a popular slang term takes on a completely new, unexpected meaning.
Oh, yeah.
That's language kind of deterritorializing.
So it's about challenging the way that we normally make sense of the world.
Exactly, exactly. And this leads us to our fourth concept.
Okay, hit me.
Territorialization, deterritorialization, and reterritorialization.
Wow, that is a mouthful.
I know, right?
Okay, let's unpack those one by one.
Yeah, let's break it down. So territorialization is fundamentally the process by which meaning, identity, or desire gets fixed into a particular structure. Think of establishing a territory. It could be a nation state with its defined borders and its national identity.
Right.
It could be a family with its specific roles and expectations, or even your workplace with its rules and hierarchies. Desire becomes territorialized when it's channeled and contained within these established structures.
Okay, so creating boundaries and rules.
Exactly.
Okay, so then what's deterritorialization?
So deterritorialization is the breakdown or the escape from these established territories. It's the process of things becoming unfixed. Identities becoming more fluid, desires moving beyond the accepted boundaries. Think of something like globalization challenging traditional national borders, or individuals questioning and moving beyond traditional gender roles.
Right, okay, so reterritorialization, that sounds like trying to put everything back in its place.
Precisely. Reterritorialization is that attempt to reimpose order, to reestablish structures, and to fix meanings after this period of deterritorialization. It's that effort to create new territories or to reinforce older ones that have been challenged. Now, schizoanalysis is really interested in exploring this constant back and forth movement of desire between these three states, how desire gets fixed, how it breaks free, and how there are always these attempts to contain it again. And they often see desire as a force that naturally pushes against dominant controls.
So controls like the way capitalism works or traditional ideas about family or national identity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which brings us to our fifth concept, which is their perspective on capitalism and desire.
I imagine they have a pretty critical view on that.
They do. They do. Their core argument is that capitalism is incredibly skilled at manipulating desire. It shapes individuals to become consumers, workers, and compliant members of society, who often, without even realizing it, internalize these forms of control and repression that ultimately serve the capitalist system itself.
So our desires aren't really coming from this pure place within us.
Not entirely, not according to their view. While capitalism does allow for a certain amount of desire to flow, after all, markets need people to want things and to buy things.
Yeah.
It simultaneously channels, restricts, and exploits that desire to ensure its own continued operation and expansion. Think about how advertising works. It creates these desires for things we may not actually need, or how societal pressures can steer our ambitions down very specific career paths.
So it's the system that both unleashes certain desires and then carefully contains and directs other desires for its own benefit.
Exactly, exactly.
So, okay, with all of that in mind, what are the overall goals of schizoanalysis? Like, what are Deleuze and Guattari ultimately trying to achieve with this way of thinking?
Well, their goals are quite broad and ambitious. Firstly, they aim to map desire in all of its complexity, not to simplify it or force it into these pre-existing frameworks like the Oedipus complex. They want to understand these intricate flows and connections of desire in all its varied forms.
So more about understanding the landscape than dictating what it should look like.
Precisely. Precisely. And secondly, they want to explore the really deep connections between our individual inner lives, our psychology, and the broader social and political world around us. They see these two realms as fundamentally intertwined, as constantly influencing each other, not as separate entities. And in the notes that you're looking at, I know that idea of how societal norms impact individual choices really came up a lot.
Yeah.
This perspective really speaks to that connection.
So moving beyond just looking at what's happening inside someone's head.
Exactly, exactly. And thirdly, a major goal is to challenge and disrupt these repressive structures at every level, from the very personal level of a nuclear family to the much larger scales of global capitalism and other forms of social control. They want to identify and dismantle the ways in which our desires are being channeled and limited in ways that restrict human potential.
So what's the ultimate hope or the outcome?
Ultimately, they hope to open up these possibilities for new, more experimental ways of living and relating to the world. By understanding these forces that shape and often limit our desires, they believe we can create space for more liberated and creative forms of individual and collective life.
Okay, that's a pretty far-reaching vision. So to really understand how different this is from maybe what we already know, can we do a quick kind of side-by-side comparison with traditional psychoanalysis?
Sure, yeah. Let's look at a few key areas. So when it comes to desire, as we've already discussed, psychoanalysis views desire as stemming from this fundamental lack, this void, and being heavily shaped by that Oedipal complex. Schizoanalysis, in contrast, sees desire as something inherently productive, potentially revolutionary, and fundamentally opposed to that Oedipal framework.
That's a huge difference.
It is, it is. And what about their main focus?
Yeah, how about that?
Traditional psychoanalysis tends to center on the individual's internal world, heavily influenced by those early family relationships. Schizoanalysis significantly broadens its scope, looking at society as a whole, the various systems at play, the flows of desire across those systems, and the machines that connect everything.
So from individual to societal.
Exactly. Exactly. How about their method?
Yeah, their methods of investigation.
Psychoanalysis relies quite heavily on interpreting the unconscious, often using techniques like dream analysis and free association to uncover these hidden meanings. Schizoanalysis, while not ignoring the unconscious, places more emphasis on mapping the flows of desire as they manifest in both the individual and the social environment. It's less about finding these hidden meanings and more about understanding the connections and intensities that are actively at play.
Okay, and lastly, how do they view the subject?
Right, the individual person. So in psychoanalysis, the individual is often seen as being structured by neurosis, by those internal conflicts arising from the Oedipal complex and other stages of psychosexual development. Schizoanalysis views the subject as much more fluid, multiple, fragmented, a constantly changing collection of desires and connections, rather than this fixed, coherent self that's defined by its neuroses.
Okay, that really clarifies how different their approach is. So why should we care? Like, why should we, as listeners, as people trying to understand the world, care about schizoanalysis? Because it still sounds pretty abstract and like something you'd only encounter in a university classroom.
That's a fair point. But schizoanalysis offers this surprisingly powerful lens for understanding all sorts of things we encounter every day. Art, culture, politics, even our own psychology, our motivations. It's the material you sent in touches on. It's actually had a significant influence on this really diverse range of fields, from media studies and feminist theory to political analysis, performance art, and even how we think about mental health.
So in what ways can it be useful for someone who's just trying to navigate the world?
Well, it really encourages us to ask these fundamental questions that we might not normally consider. Questions like, where do our desires for certain things actually come from? Who benefits from the way that our desires are shaped and directed? And perhaps most importantly, how do we resist simply becoming what institutions, whether that's our workplace, social media, or even broader societal expectations, want us to be? It pushes us towards this more critical and nuanced understanding of the forces that influence our thoughts, feelings, and actions. Thinking about territorialization, you could look at how online communities create these territories of shared interest and identity.
It's about becoming more aware of these underlying forces that shape not just our own desires, but the society that we live in.
Exactly, exactly. It's about looking beyond those surface level explanations and digging into the deeper mechanisms of power and desire that are constantly at work all around us.
Okay, so to kind of recap our deep dive into schizoanalysis, it's this really radical way of understanding the mind and society. It was developed by Deleuze and Guattari. And it fundamentally challenges traditional psychoanalysis by seeing desire not as this lack, this void tied to our family history, but as this dynamic and even revolutionary force that's shaped by the social and political world.
Right. And we've looked at some of those key ideas like desiring production, the body without organs, and how desire moves through these processes of territorialization, deterritorialization, and reterritorialization.
And we've also talked about how it differs from traditional psychoanalysis, and its broader focus on society and systems, its method of mapping desire rather than just interpreting the unconscious, and its view of the individual as this fluid and multifaceted being.
Yeah, definitely.
And ultimately, it gives us this new way to look at the world, prompting us to question where our desires come from and how we might have more agency in shaping them, rather than just being shaped by external forces. So for you, our listener, we really encourage you to think about these questions that schizoanalysis raises in your own life. Consider the various systems you're a part of, from your workplace to your social circles, and how they might be influencing what you want and how you act. Reflect on where your own wants and needs truly originate, and who might be benefiting from their particular direction. And here's a final thought to really chew on. What if we truly understood desire, not as some personal deficiency that we're always trying to fix, but as this incredibly powerful engine for connection and creation that's constantly operating within this larger social machine? What completely new possibilities for how we live, both as individuals and as a society, might open up if we fundamentally shifted our perspective on desire in this way?
It's a really powerful question to consider.
It is. That's something to really think about. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Absolutely.